Well, we've got a lot of book tonight. We're going to talk about 1 Samuel. Now, I know the biblical folks here are saying, didn't you jump over Ruth? Yes, I did.
The women said that you jumped over Ruth.
And I'm going to come back to Ruth. I'm going to do all the women of the Bible at the same time. Ruth and Jezebel and Delilah. Sorry. Just wanted to make you mad. Now, I'm going to come back to Ruth at a different time, but I'm just in an aggressive mood, and I want to jump into 1 Samuel today. Samuel is interesting because we're talking about a new order that's about to take place. We went from Moses and Joshua, then came the judges. And that's when the time was lawless and people did what was right in their own eyes and they weren't paying attention to God. And then they would finally cry out, "We can't stand our pain anymore, help us God." And he would come in, save the day. Then they'd go back to being idol worshipers. And this happened for quite some time. And then God's about to do something different. And he's bringing in Samuel. And the story starts with a guy named Eli. And there's a woman, Hannah, who's in church, and she's in prayer. And she's praying out loud. I don't know how many of you talk out loud when you're alone. Driving the car, and you're talking out loud, and the person next to you is looking at you, and you realize you got busted, and you pretend like you're talking to the child. I talk out loud sometimes. You know what? When I read this passage, he sees her talking out loud, and he says, "Why do you get drunk and come to worship?" I'm not drinking. I'm praying. And it's important that we pause before we release a judgment. We pause and try to read the situation correctly, accurately. Sometimes pain manifests itself with humor. We cover it with humor. Guys are real good at that. Sometimes we have a sting to us because we're hurting. And it's important for Christians when somebody stings you not to get offended, not to sting back, but to look a little bit beyond the sting. What's going on that causes you to have this little edge? Some people are apathetic. Some people have been through really challenging times. I've made the mistake of judging folks in my mind only to find out that the reason they don't come to church is because they had a lot of bad things happen to them. Children dying, big kind of stuff. And I shouldn't be judging. I should be praying. And so when Eli sees Hannah, I just got to thinking about not misreading people's pain. Well, he says, whatever prayer you want to have, may God give it to you. She wants to have a child, and she gets to have little Samuel. And Samuel's kind of an important guy. In Jeremiah 15:1, when God is bragging about his favorites, well, actually he's saying, "I'm going to destroy Jerusalem. It wouldn't matter if Moses and Samuel was here. They'd only save themselves, and the rest of you would die." He holds up Samuel as one of the people that is on God's favorite list. And the problem with Eli is this. In 2:12 it says, "The sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. They're priests, and they're messing around with the sacrifices. They're messing around with the women. They're messing around." And it's a little bit of a bummer because you can be a priest and not get it. Now, it's easy for me to say today when the Pope steps down and we know about all the stuff. And I'm not talking about the Catholic priests right now, although I think the Catholic priests, just like the Protestant shysters, there's different kinds of sinners. There's people who make sinful choices out of pain driving them. There's the kind that are opportunistic. Two different kinds of people. Okay? So even there, it's important that we we hold back a little bit before we just release our scathing judgments, which we should never really release, okay? But these guys are bad, and in chapter 3:13, it says, God tells Eli the iniquity which he knew his sons were doing, and he did not rebuke them. So Eli's accountable for not handling his sons correctly. Now, I'm a parent. I got 2 kids. And I read a verse like this and I get a little bit nervous. Okay? In my office today was a gentleman who's 70 years old, and his children aren't really walking with the Lord according to him. And it's a pain on his heart. And it's real easy, I think, for you to go, well, it's too late. I want to say, hold on. If you come to your child with a lot of love, and if you made mistakes, say, hey, you know what, I made a lot of mistakes. I'm old enough now to figure that out. I've come to apologize. And I also want to share with you my faith. If you do it in a real gentle way, that's leadership. If you try to tell them how they ought to be, it's not going to work. Okay? Doesn't work with anybody. But I do want to say, notice, we're accountable for what we tell our kids. And Samuel, he has an experience where the Lord speaks to him. I had the joy of hearing from God when I was 10 years old. I've heard from him quite a few times in my life. So I resonate with Samuel and God having a close relationship. So Samuel grows up from 3 years old on with the priest as his parents. He lived away from his mom in the temple, and he becomes a radical man of God. So, chapter 5 of Samuel, the Philistines are the neighbors of the Israelites, and they're always picking fights. Okay, they try to starve them to death. They try to get rid of all of their metal so that they can't defend themselves or plow the fields. They attack them and take the ark. They take the ark of God. We're going to take it, and they put it in front of their god, Dagon. And so this is something God takes personally, all right? And this doesn't say this in the English language, but when it says that God smote them with tumors, in the Hebrews, it's actually hemorrhoids, okay? So God is having fun giving it to the Philistines, all right? And these guys, it says, the pain was very great, okay? And not only is it tumors, the place starts to get agitated and violent and confusion, and they go every morning and Dagon's bowed down. This huge idol is bowed down in front of the ark. And well, what happened? He fell over. And the next time they do it, they put him back up and his head's cut off and his arms are cut off. And then all this anxiousness is happening in the city, and they say, you know, we ought to get rid of this thing called the ark. And just kind of fun to see that God has a sense of humor when he goes to town on people. Samuel delivers Israel from the Philistines, and then something kind of sad takes place. The people say, we want a king instead of your sons ruling over us, Samuel. Did Eli, his mentor, do a good job parenting? No. Guess who else did not do a good job parenting? Samuel. How could this great man of God not pass down his values? Okay? And maybe you feel that way, like, you know, I did my best. I took my kids to Sunday school. We prayed over the meal. I bought them every toy that they ever wanted. Maybe that was the problem. You didn't buy them enough toys. Who knows why it turns out the way it does? All I know is if you keep fighting for your children in prayer, we have a God who knows what's on your heart, who wants to give you the desires of your heart. So you keep praying, you keep bringing them before the Lord. And in the meantime, Israel says, we don't want your family ruling over us. And God says, Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And they say, we want to be like everybody else. And this is a bad statement because actually what makes them different is they're not like everybody else. They have a God who does a lot of stuff. They say, we want a king that goes and fights our battles. Well, they have a God who confuses the enemy in battles, okay? Sometimes not a single person would be lost when they went to war. That's just not really possible, is it? Boulders would fall down from heaven. God would send hornets. He would cause internal strife. One time, 180 Assyrians just didn't wake up for battle. All the time, this kind of activity was the way God protected his people. But we don't want that. We want to be like everybody else. And I feel like that's what's happened to the Church of Jesus Christ in America. But we've kind of lost that separation identity. You know, it's hard to tell a Christian from a non-Christian today at the workplace. Worst thing you could ever hear is, I didn't know you were a Christian, from somebody that you've been working alongside of for a long time. I hate it when people say that to me because I'm a pastor, okay? I hear it at the gym. I didn't know you were a pastor. Well, believe me, I don't say bad things or, I'm aware that I'm a pastor. But here's the problem. They want a king because they want to be like the rest of the world. And Samuel warns them, listen, he's going to tax you. He's going to take all your stuff. He's going to take your children and turn them into his servants. There's this huge long list of everything that's going to go wrong. And you can see that when you do it the natural way instead of the supernatural way, there's a heavy price to be paid. And you start to see that God actually wants freedom for us. He wants joy in our lives. We always think of God as the cosmic killjoy. When you're in college, God doesn't want me to have sex with. It's such a hard thing to be a Christian, and talk to people later in life who had too much sex, and they've lost their soul, they've given it away, they've been jaded. Actually, God knows what he's talking about when he says, why don't you save this for marriage? Okay? He tells you how to raise your children, and you do it his way. There's joy in the house. Well, I found this interesting statement that sin, it takes you farther than you wanted to go. It keeps you there longer than you wanted to stay. It costs you more than you wanted to pay. And see, these folks are making the wrong decision, and it's really going to cost them. We want to be like all the other nations. And I can't help but wonder, does that sound like America today? Well, here's what takes place. God honors their requests. And you know what he does? Does this sound like God or what? Not only does he honor them, this is what he says. I have regarded my people because their cry has come to me. I have regarded them. Well, now wait, they're actually choosing against them, but he knows they're going to make the wrong choice, so now he's going to go to work to put the right person in place. This is God, vintage God, taking our bad decisions and turning them into good, if we'll allow him. Well, he picks Saul, and I want to make a big deal out of this statement. In 1 Samuel 10:6 says, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you mightily, and you shall prophesy with them and be changed into another man. And I can't help but read this. And the first thing that happens is I wonder, am I different? Am I any different than I used to be, having walked with the Lord for decades? Am I any different than my non-Christian friends who don't walk with the Lord? I had another encounter today that was a little intriguing for me. This person was talking about their faith. And it became real obvious to me that it was all about, I do this right and I don't do this wrong. Okay, in Christianity, we call that law-based religion. We follow the rules. We don't break the laws. And I paused because, well, even on our best day, we can't carry out the rules. That's why we needed the cross. That's why Jesus came, to help us do what we couldn't do, to do it for us. And then, you know how we carry it out? When the Holy Spirit comes upon us. And I want to make a big deal out of this, because if you are somebody who's still trying to follow the rules, so you're going to be right with God, and you're going to please Him, no. That's not the approach. Don't have your eyes on the rules. Have your eyes on Jesus. And as you follow Him and talk to Him and stay in that relationship, suddenly your choices change. And you don't need rules, because you're automatically doing what His Spirit is guiding you to do. And notice in this verse, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you and you'll be another person. Okay? What brings the change? The Spirit. Have you been changed? If not, tonight, I want you to invite the Holy Spirit to come in. I'm tired of thinking self-defeating thoughts. I'm tired of having an anger issue. I'm tired of always giving over to my lust. I'm tired of always being in fear and worry. I'm tired of having a critical spirit. Holy Spirit, change me so that I think the way God does. That's the prayer. And you stay on that prayer and you watch God move in your life. Well, so all kinds of stuff has happened, and I just can't talk about everything. Samuel gives him a king. It's Saul, and Saul makes a mistake. And I'm going to focus on this mistake a minute. In 1Samuel 13, he's about to go to war with the Philistines, and Samuel says, wait till I get there to do the sacrifice. Okay. I don't know about any of you, but am I the only impatient person in here? Okay. It is hard to wait on the Lord. And it's hard because in verse 6, they were hard pressed. The people were hard pressed. They hid themselves. They were trembling. They were scattering. So the king's about to go to war, and his people are scattering. And he's waiting on Samuel. And Samuel's not coming. And so what does he do? He takes care of the sacrifice himself. He's not allowed to do that. Okay? And I hate this. As soon as he finished offering the sacrifice, all he had to do was wait another half hour. Do you ever feel like God extends you just beyond what you can handle? That's what's happening here. And what you and I have to do is say, you know what? I'm going to trust God. I'm going to believe God. I'm going to wait on God. I don't know if you're waiting on a job. I don't know if you're waiting on a relationship. I don't know what you might be wanting God to do in your life, a healing. But trust Him and wait Him out, because He wants to bring goodness to you. Because he didn't wait, he loses the kingdom. Now it's kind of fun. His son, he's cruising around. The Philistines are over there. He's over here, and he says, perhaps the Lord, let's go over there and attack those Philistines. Perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few. Perhaps. Okay? That's faith in action. He knows who God is, and he knows that God doesn't have to have a big army. And he goes and has a great victory. Well, here's what happens. God is sorry that he made Saul king. He says, I regret that I made him king. And I read that and I think, oh man, I wonder how many times God has regretted in my life. There's this passage in Hebrews 10:38. He who shrinks back, my soul takes no pleasure in. And how many times have we stepped forward only to fail, only to backslide, only to let our faith down? I'm probably not the only person who's had that experience. Here's the good news. God's never going to give up on you. But I want you to feel something. Because we've kind of turned our faith into, well, I'm going to be forgiven anyways. I'm in heaven. It doesn't really matter. You've forgotten the emotional investment that God has made in you. You've forgotten the joy that comes to his heart when you go ahead and surrender to him and do it his way. When you actually fight off temptation. When you actually get involved in the ministry. When you're willing to write a check. When you're willing to forgive somebody that hurt you. When you're willing to take a step in faith. That makes God happy. He's emotionally involved in you. He's not some distant being that, no. He's totally, from the heart, involved with you. And he says, to obey is better than sacrifice. To heed than the fat of rams. Rebellion is as the sin of divination. In other words, when you sin against God, it's like Satan worship to him. Ouch. I mean, I thought I was just dabbling a little bit in my, you fill in the blank, gossip, judgment, whatever your sin might be. It's actually a lot worse than that. It's so bad that Jesus had to die on the cross. That's bad. Okay? Well, it's time for somebody else. And so God sends Samuel to find the next king. And Samuel goes to this guy's house, and he's got these handsome, warrior-like sons. And he goes, oh, it must be this guy. Oh, it must be the next guy. And finally God says, hey, look, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I've rejected him. For God sees not as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And this is cool. One time I went to meet Desmond Tutu. I was in Los Angeles. Do you know how small he is? He's tiny. And do you realize what great work God did through this diminutive man? Not the leader you would expect, but he had this radical heart. And you know where he got that radical heart? One day, they're walking down the street in South Africa, and this white man, preacher, comes walking down, and whenever the white man's on the sidewalk, African Americans, or Africans, supposed to get out of the way. Instead, the white preacher steps into the street, tips his hat to the woman, lets them pass by. Desmond Tutu says, that's when I knew I wanted to be an Anglican priest. Something as stupid and simple as honoring a nice gesture like that turned a mighty man of God loose. Well, David and Goliath. It's in 1 Samuel. This is good stuff, okay? And I think all of us have a Goliath in our life, okay? A cancer, a termination notice, divorce, death, financial woes, self-control problems, depression, unfulfilled dreams, a boring life. And you can't get away from it, and it's dogging you. Well, Goliath in real life is 9 foot 6 inches, 2.5 feet taller than Shaq. It's big, okay? Don't our problems seem kind of big sometimes? Overwhelming sometimes. We can't sleep. And sometimes it's not just a week. It's not just a season. If we're not careful, Goliath lasts for years. And so here's what's going on. Goliath is taunting the people of Israel. Kind of like the way the ACLU taunts Christians right now. I was reading through a list today of all the negatives that got my blood all upset. Can't be Christmas, it's winter break. I mean, it's a long list of anti-Christian stuff, and they don't mind getting in our face. Remember one time, I'm going to get a job. And I know that I'm not going to get this job when I'm waiting in the waiting room, and the person says to me, "So you think that man is a special creation?" And I'm thinking, well, what kind of a stupid question is that? And I said, so do you think all species are the same? I mean, obviously, we're made in the image of God. We make cities. We fly to the moon. We have moral processing that takes place. Guess who was on the committee that was going to interview me? I didn't get that job. But I couldn't help it. He starts taunting me with theology that is not even Christian. I had to give it back to him. And so Goliath's words kind of had the effect that a lot of Christians do when they hear the non-Christian. Oh no, we're being attacked. I don't want to come across like I'm one of those idiots, like I'm one of those holy rollers. Problem is we quit rolling and there's no more holiness. And it's time for us to call them on the illogical conclusions that they come to. Well, here's what happens. David shows up. He hears Goliath. He sees everybody run and he says, "Oh, what's the deal here?" And his brothers, "Where are those few sheep that you tend to?" The discouragers. Do you have any of those in your life? The people that point out everything that could go wrong. The people that take the wind out of your sails. The people that keep you from stepping forward in faith. David doesn't allow that. Okay? And I want to tell you something. All our affairs are theological battles. I don't care what Goliath or situation you're in. You know, I walked into a hospital room yesterday. No, 2 days ago. It was really cool. The doctor had just walked out, and I did not know this, and given some possibly bad news. And so I'm passing him on the way. He's going out, I'm walking in. So this person doesn't even have time to cry yet. They go, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're here. This is what the doctor just told me." I go, "Wow, let me tell you something. I've been seeing miracles lately. And so, why don't we pray?" And you know what? As of yesterday, all good news. One more test. I haven't made it to the hospital yet today. It's still early. It's a confidence because you know you belong to God. You read the scriptures. David knows what his identity is. He knows the depth of God's love. If God is for us, who can be against us? I'm with you always. I'll counsel you with my eye upon you. Okay? And so instead of falling into a dysfunctional puddle, we might say, "Oh, I have a Goliath." And Goliaths are good for our faith. Because if we don't get tested, our faith is fragile. And so whatever your Goliath might be, it's okay. Decide to turn it into a theological battle. Well, we know how the story goes. David goes out. He meets Goliath. And he doesn't say this, "If it's your will, I'll beat him." Doesn't say that. And I've learned over the years that usually when I say, "If it's your will," it's a nice way of saying, "I don't really think it's going to happen." It's a veiled admission of doubt. Now, sometimes, "if it's your will," means you have more knowledge about the situation than I do. Okay? I have an idea that it's going to go this way. You might know more. So I'm just operating off of the scriptures. But you have to catch yourself. Do you really believe? Are you really willing to step forward? David's willing to step forward. And notice this. He says, just like I beat the lion and I beat the bear in my personal life, I'm going to take this tall guy down. See, he has practice with his weapons. And what are our weapons? Prayer. I don't want to see hands. Did you pray today? Did you open up the Bible and read a chapter or two? Did you read your devotional book? Or did you get up, go to the computer, get onto the emails, get busy in the day, get on the telephone, rush off to wherever it was you're going? It's a whole different way of preparing. Okay? He's prepared to meet Goliath because he spent time experiencing God in his life. Well, he tosses the rock, he puts a hole in his head. And the reason that he takes Goliath down is because his ambition is that there, on all the earth, everyone may know that there is a God in Israel. And it gets kind of personal here because do you live so that other people will know about God? I have to catch myself. Am I going out there to make it happen? Or am I going out there to glorify God? Am I going to the gym, to Starbucks? Am I going to work to glorify God? Is every relationship, every conversation, everything I do, is it aimed at pleasing God and engaging God and spreading the message of God? Because Christian, if you are a believer, that's what we're supposed to live for. Well, what about me? All these things will be added unto you. But the fact that you have to say, what about me? Means you haven't fallen in love with God yet. You don't appreciate how much he's irrationally in love with you, committed to you, wants to move in your life.